So if you're heading on a trip to Ohio soon, you're probably wondering which park is more worth visiting, Cedar Point or Kings Island. And in today's video, we will be answering that question to truly figure out which park is more worth visiting, Cedar Point or Kings Island. Let's go. So starting out with the koshers, let's first compare both parks' inverted koshers, that being Raptor at Cedar Point and Banshee at Kings Island. Now, in my personal opinion, I think Raptor is slightly better, and here's why. Now, Banshee is the smoother ride and just overall the more comfortable ride, but I feel like Raptor is definitely more enjoyable and is definitely way more intense. This also mainly comes down to the restraint system, as Raptor's restraints are a lot more open, while Banshee's restraints are more comfortable but will hug your body pretty tight. But also, Raptor's inversions in general are just much more snappy and intense. Mainly the vertical loop, zero G-roll, and corkscrews are a lot more intense than the ones on Banshee. So for that reason, I will be giving Cedar Point the first 2 points, making the score 2-0, Cedar Point in the lead. So moving on to both parks' mine train koshers. We have Cedar Creek Mine Ride at Cedar Point and Adventure Express at Kings Island. Now both these koshers are fairly similar, but I do think Adventure Express is generally the smoother experience, though both are fairly janky. And also, Adventure Express does have more theming, and because of that, it is definitely way more enjoyable. Though Cedar Creek Mine Ride does have a pretty nice setting going over a lake. But other than that, in my opinion, Adventure Express is the better ride. So Kings Island will be getting 2 points for Adventure Express, making the score 2-2. So moving on to both parks' hyper koshers, which is a kosher over 200 feet, we have Magnum XL 200, the OG at Cedar Point, and Diamondback at Kings Island. Now both these rides are fun, but Diamondback is just the superior ride in basically all regards. In my opinion, Diamondback is just the way smoother, way more enjoyable ride. Plus, it goes out into the woods and has a much better layout than Magnum XL 200. As Magnum does give some nice views of Cedar Point's beach and Lake Erie, but Diamondback goes out into the woods and just generally has a much better setting. Now, the ending hills on Magnum do give better airtime than any hill on Diamondback, but you also have to remember Magnum is a much older attraction than Diamondback, and therefore is much more janky and rougher. So that's why Diamondback is just the much more enjoyable, smooth, and just pure fun kosher. And because of that, I will be giving Kings Island an extra 3 points for Diamondback, making the score 2-5, Kings Island in the lead. Now this will be a quick and easy matchup as we're comparing both parks' kiddie koshers. That would be Wilderness Run at Cedar Point and the Great Pumpkin Kosher at Kings Island. Now, to be honest, both these rides are very similar, as you can't really do much with the kiddie kosher. So this will be a nice, quick, and easy one, as I will be giving both parks an extra 1 point for their kiddie koshers. Now let's compare both parks' blue wooden koshers. That be the aptly named Blue Streak at Cedar Point and Woodstock Express at Kings Island. Now both these are on the smaller side, as both are geared more towards families and kids. But despite that, Blue Streak actually gives some pretty good airtime and is generally a much more enjoyable ride. Even though Blue Streak is a bit rougher than Woodstock Express, it's not much, and Blue Streak has definitely aged amazing since it opened back in 1964, and Blue Streak is still running very good and delivers some surprisingly good airtime, considering it's only 70 something feet tall, goes 40 miles per hour. It's still surprisingly good. And Woodstock Express is basically exactly what you would expect for a kiddie wooden kosher, as it doesn't really have much going on with the forces, but the one benefit Woodstock Express does have is the restraints are much more open and freeing, as it is a kiddie wooden kosher. So because of that, I will be giving Blue Streak an extra 1 point for Cedar Point, making the score 4-6, Kings Island in the lead. Compare both parks' racing koshers, that being Gemini at Cedar Point and Racer at Kings Island. Now both these rides aren't anything special and they're just pure fun rides. which is kind of surprising because both these rides are fairly old. But the main difference between these two rides is that Gemini has steel track and wooden supports, making it a hybrid coaster, while Racer is purely a wooden coaster. Despite this, both these rides are fairly smooth despite their age, and they both deliver some pretty nice airtime, though Gemini does deliver the stronger airtime, even though neither ride delivers super strong airtime. But because of that slightly stronger airtime that Gemini delivers over Racer, I will be giving Gemini an extra 2 points, making the score 6-6. So now let's compare both parks' suspended coasters, that being Iron Dragon at Cedar Point and the Bat at Kings Island. Now personally, Iron Dragon has the much better setting as it's located over a lake at Cedar Point, and it's actually a much better ride than a lot of people give it credit for, as Iron Dragon is definitely much more of a family coaster than the Bat is, but it still isn't forceless like a lot of other people say. It delivers some decent forces, but not nearly as strong as the Bat. Now, the Bat is a much more intense suspended coaster as the trains swing much higher and the ride just goes much faster through the turns, and it's just much more forceful in general because of that. Now, one quirk with the Bat that you should note about if you visit Kings Island is that if you're coming from the closest ride to the Bat, which is Banshee, the Bat is a pretty far walk away from Banshee, so just be prepared to do a lot of walking if you plan on riding the Bat. But other than that, the Bat is a much better ride than Iron Dragon, despite Iron Dragon having the better setting. So that's why I will be giving Kings Island an extra 2 points for the Bat, making the score 6-8, Kings Island in the lead. Cedar Point has a bunch of unique coasters that Kings Island just can't compete with, which some of those being Steel Vengeance, which is arguably one of the best coasters in the world. It's easily within my top 5 of best coasters I've ever ridden, and because of that, I will be giving that 3 points for Cedar Point. You also have Maverick, which is an intense launch coaster right next to Steel Vengeance and is also a great ride. And because of that, I will be giving Maverick an extra 3 points. And then you also have Millenium Force, which was the first coaster over 300 feet and isn't the most intense ride, but it's a pure fun speed machine. And because of that, I will be giving Cedar Point 3 points for Millenium Force. Then you have Rougarou, which I will be giving 2 points for, which is a floorless coaster that honestly isn't very good. Like, it doesn't have a bad layout or anything. Actually, the layout's pretty good. But it's just not a very comfortable and smooth ride. And I just feel like if the ride were to get a retrack, it would be a lot better. But then also with Cedar Point, you have Woodstock Express, which is a family coaster, and I will be giving the park an extra point for that. Then you have Valraven, the park's dive coaster. And this opened actually as the world's tallest and fastest dive coaster. And I didn't get to do Valraven because it was closed for me when I went to Cedar Point, but I've done other dive coasters, and these are fun, but they're nothing special. And I feel like Valraven does have one of the best layouts of any dive coaster personally, but I just can't see, especially with the vest restraints, how the drops would compare to, like, for example, Griffin and Shikra that I have done. So for that, I will be giving Valraven an extra 2 points for Cedar Point. Then you also have Corkscrew, which was the first coaster to ever go upside down 3 times, and it's not a very comfortable ride. I would personally recommend skipping it if you go to Cedar Point. And for that, I will be giving Cedar Point an extra point for. Then you have Gatekeeper, which is the first coaster you see when you walk up to Cedar Point, and is an amazing looking ride, being located right next to the park's beach and flying over the park entrance. But it's honestly, it looks better than it rides. Like, the drop is fun, but it's just not a very forceful experience, personally. And as for me, I prefer a more forceful experience, so I will be giving Gatekeeper an extra 2 points for Cedar Point. And then that will make the score 23-8, Cedar Point in the lead. So now also, Kings Island has a bunch of coasters that Cedar Point just can't compete with. So let's start with the world famous Beast, which is known for being the world's longest wooden coaster, and at least from my experience back in 2019, it was running pretty darn rough. Like, it's honestly one of the roughest wooden coasters I've ridden, and because of that, it's honestly probably one of the worst coasters I've ever ridden. So because of that, I would be giving Kings Island 1 point for the Beast. Now, a note, if you go ride the Beast today at Kings Island, I bet it's running a lot better because it got a pretty bit heavy retrack, but at least when I rode it, it was running pretty rough. Then you also have Kings Island's Family Launch Coaster, Backlot Stunt Coaster, which is a fun coaster that pulls some decent forces here and there, and also surprisingly has a decent bit of theming. But other than that, it's just a pretty good family coaster, so because of that, I will be giving Kings Island an extra 2 points for Backlot Stunt Coaster. Then you have Flight of Fear, which is their indoor launch coaster, and this thing is just crazy. The launch is pretty darn forceful. You can't see anything because it's pitch black darkness, and you're just flying around yourself, and it's a mesmerizing experience. So because of that, I would be giving Flight of Fear an extra 2 points for Kings Island. Then you also have their inverted boomerang, which is known as Invertigo, which is a decent ride, nothing special, mainly filler at the park, to be honest. And because of that, I will be giving Invertigo 1 point for Kings Island. Then you also have their family inverted coaster, Flying Ace Aerial Chase. And I personally haven't ridden Flying Ace, but I have ridden an exact clone at Legoland, Florida, and that was pretty garbage. So I bet this is the same in terms of quality. And because of that, I will be giving Flying Ace an extra 1 point for Kings Island. Then you also have Mystic Timbers, which is arguably one of their best coasters, which is a fast-paced wooden coaster. And because of that, I will be giving Kings Island an extra 3 points for Mystic Timbers. Then you have Orion, which is their newest edition, opened back in 2020. And I personally have not ridden Orion, but it looks to be a fun ride that just seems to give some pretty nice air times, some good positive Gs here and there. And it doesn't look to be the longest ride, but it seems to be a pretty enjoyable experience. So because of that, I will be giving Orion an extra 3 points for Kings Island, making the score 23-21, Cedar Point in the lead. Cedar Point and Kings Island also have their fair share of interesting flat rides. At Cedar Point, you have Max Air, which is their frisbee attraction, and for that, I will be giving the park an extra 2 points for. You have Power Tower, which is their drop tower that shoots you up and then drops you down, and for that, I will be giving the park an extra 2 points for. You have Skyhawk, which is a swing ride that is powered with compressed air, and because that, it never feels out of control. It's always a very controlled experience, but it does give some pretty good airtime and swings you up pretty darn high for this kind of ride. So because of that, I will be giving Cedar Point an extra 2 points for Skyhawk. And then you also have Windseeker. It's the park's swing ride that lifts you up on a tower up 300 feet in the air, and you get an amazing view of all of Cedar Point. And for that, I will be giving Cedar Point an extra 2 points for Windseeker, making the score 31-21, Cedar Point in the lead. Now, Kings Island has a bunch of unique flat rides that are definitely worth checking out if you visit the park. This is including Delirium, which is the park's frisbee attraction that swings up to about 120 degrees, same as Max Air. So because of that, I will be giving the park an extra 2 points for Delirium. You also have their unoriginally named Drop Tower, and that's literally just the name, Drop Tower. And it's a 315-foot drop tower, and it's actually a pretty intense drop. Goes on for a pretty long amount of time and gives some nice floater airtime. So because of that, I will be giving Drop Tower an extra 2 points for Kings Island. And then you also have the park's dark ride, Boo Blasters, which is something Cedar Point cannot compete with. But honestly, from my experience, it is not a very good dark ride. Actually, what happened to me with Boo Blasters at Kings Island is it actually stopped halfway through the ride. I don't know what was going on, but the ride operator stopped the ride for me halfway through. And that wasn't even the worst of it, as a bunch of targets didn't seem too accurate, but then also it's just like, it's a pretty old and like just cheap feeling dark ride. So because of that, I will be giving Boo Blasters an extra 1 point for Kings Island. Now, at least when it comes to Boo Blaster at Kings Island's sister park, Carowinds, I had a better experience on that one, as it has the same flaws with Kings Island's, as it's still a cheaply made dark ride, but at least with the one at Carowinds for me, all the targets work, and it didn't stop halfway through the ride for me, so that's good with the one at Carowinds. But back to Kings Island. They also have the same Windseeker attraction that you'll find at Cedar Point, but the main difference is you don't get as good of a view. And because of that, I will be giving Windseeker an extra 2 points for Kings Island, making the score 31-28. Cedar Point is in the lead. The final score, Cedar Point wins 31-28. Now, I feel like the reason why Cedar Point won is just because a lot of their best rides are better than Kings Island's best rides. But I will admit, when it comes to Cedar Point and Kings Island, Cedar Point definitely has the better thrilling attractions, but Kings Island definitely does the family attractions better than Cedar Point does. And that's not to say that Cedar Point doesn't have a lack of family attractions, as there is pretty much something for everybody to enjoy at Cedar Point, from the beach to the rides to a bunch of other stuff that I didn't mention in this video. But I do think if you had to choose one, Cedar Point is the better park to visit. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to like this video and share this video with anybody you know who's going to be visiting Ohio soon. Also remember to subscribe to Southeastern Thrills, and also check out my videos on why both Kings Island and Cedar Point are overrated. And peace.